Have you ever looked at the world around you, scrolled through the news, seen the headlines, and just felt this sinking feeling that maybe we're not heading in the right direction? It's a strange thought, isn't it? Because everything we're taught from a young age is a story of progress. It's a straight line, always pointing up. We started as hunter-gatherers, huddled in caves, and now we have supercomputers in our pockets that can access the sum of all human knowledge. We developed agriculture, built cities, created art, cured diseases. By all accounts, we should be living in the best time in human history. We've climbed the mountain and planted our flag at the summit. But does it always feel that way? Despite all our technological marvels and scientific breakthroughs, we're also facing monumental challenges. We're more connected than ever, yet people report feeling more isolated and lonely. We have unprecedented wealth, but also staggering inequality. We have the power to solve so many problems, but we often seem to be creating new ones just as fast. It's this weird paradox. We're living longer, safer, and more comfortable lives than any of our ancestors could have dreamed of. But there's a nagging feeling, an undercurrent of anxiety, that suggests we've lost something important along the way. What if that story of constant progress is just that? A story? What if it's not the only story we've ever told ourselves? Long before we had the narrative of scientific progress, ancient cultures had a very different idea of human history. For them, history wasn't a line pointing up towards a glorious future. It was a line pointing down, away from a perfect, long-lost past. They believed that humanity didn't start in struggle and climb to greatness. They believed we started in perfection, and have been falling ever since. This is the core idea behind one of the most powerful myths in Western civilization, the 5 Ages of Man. It's a story told most famously by the ancient Greek poet Hesiod around 700 BC. He looked at the world around him, a world of toil, war, and injustice, and he didn't see the culmination of progress. He saw the degraded remnant of something beautiful. He saw a world in decline. The story he tells is a kind of spiritual history of humanity, a cosmic timeline that charts our fall from grace. It begins in a paradise, a golden age, where life was blissful and free from suffering. But from there, with each successive age, silver, bronze, and finally, his own Iron Age, humanity becomes more flawed, more violent, more arrogant, and more miserable. It's a deeply pessimistic view, but also a strangely compelling one. It speaks to that feeling that maybe, just maybe, in our relentless push forward, we've left our best selves behind. This is the story of how we lost paradise, and what it cost us. So, what was this paradise actually like? According to Hesiod, the very first generation of humanity, the Golden Race, was crafted by the gods during the reign of the Titan Cronus. No job to wake up for, no bills to pay, no deadlines to meet. The Golden Race, Hesiod says, lived like gods, with hearts free from sorrow. After the earth covered this generation over, they were transformed. The Golden Race didn't fall because of some sin or mistake they made. Their age ended simply because the cosmic order changed. The time of the Titans came to a violent end. Zeus, the son Cronus had tried to devour, rose up, waged a tenure war, and overthrew his father, casting him and the other Titans into the dark abyss of Tartarus. A new god was on the throne in Olympus, with a new vision for the universe. And with that cosmic shift, the Golden Age was over. The earth simply closed over them, and it was time for the new gods to try their hand at creating humanity, and their attempt would be significantly less perfect. By the will of the new king, Zeus, they became what the Greeks called daemons. These aren't demons in the modern, evil sense. They were pure, benevolent spirits, guardians of mortal men. Hesiod says they roamed the earth, wrapped in mist, watching over us, guarding against injustice, and bestowing wealth. So, the very first humans were so good, so pure, that even after death, they continued to exist as a force for good in the world. They were a perfect creation for a perfect time. There was no work. None. They didn't have to toil or struggle, because the bounteous earth, all on its own, provided an endless abundance of food. Think fruit, honey, wild grains, just there for the taking. Life wasn't a struggle for survival. It was an effortless existence of peace and feasting. Now, if you know your Greek mythology, Cronus is a complicated figure, famous for, eating his children to prevent a prophecy from coming true. But in the context of the ages of man, his reign over the heavens represented a time of cosmic stability and perfection. He was the king of a pristine, untroubled universe, and the humans he ruled over reflected that perfection. Imagine a life without any of the things that cause us stress. And it wasn't just their environment that was perfect. Their bodies were, too. They never experienced the miseries of old age. They didn't get sick. Their bodies didn't weaken or ache. They lived long, full lives in a state of perpetual, vigorous youth. And when their time finally came, they didn't die in pain or fear. Death was described as being overcome by sleep. It was a gentle, peaceful transition, as natural as lying down to rest at the end of a long, happy day. There was no terror in it, just a quiet end to a blissful existence. But here's where it gets really interesting. Their story didn't end with that peaceful sleep. So why did it end? If everything was so perfect, what went wrong? Well, that's the tragedy of it. Nothing went wrong on their part. With Cronus gone, and the Golden Age over, the throne of the universe now belonged to Zeus, and the new king decided it was time for a new model of humanity. So, the Olympian gods got to work and created the second generation, the Silver Race. And let me tell you, this was a serious downgrade. Hesiod is very clear about this. He says they were less noble by far, and in no way like the Golden Race in body or in spirit. He didn't have the chill, hands-off vibe of his father Cronus. Zeus was a god of order, power, and, when necessary, wrath. He saw this impious race living their short, painful lives and refusing to even offer a simple prayer or sacrifice, and his anger grew. These weren't the noble beings he envisioned. They were a mistake, a blemish, and Zeus was not one to let a mistake stand. If the Golden Age was humanity in its perfect, final form, the Silver Age was like a weird, awkward beta version that was full of bugs. He actively put them away, as Hesiod says, burying them beneath the earth. Their fate after death was also a pale imitation of what came before. They didn't become benevolent guardian spirits who roamed the earth. They became the blessed spirits of the underworld. They still got some honor, but they were confined, hidden away, a testament to a failed project. The Silver Age was a short-lived, miserable affair that ended in divine punishment. And it established a new, dangerous precedent for the relationship between gods and mortals. From now on, humanity was on probation. If you step out of line, the gods will put you back in it, forcefully. The age of easy grace was over, and the age of fear had begun. The first major bug was their bizarre life cycle. You see, a child of the Silver Race would spend 100 years, a full century as a big baby, playing at home by his dear mother's side. The Golden Race had lived in natural harmony with the divine. The Silver Race, they were arrogant, they were insolent, they refused to give the gods their due. They would unmake sacrifices on the holy altars, or give the Olympians the honor that was required by the new divine law. This was a huge problem for Zeus. He was a new king who had fought a war to establish his rule. He demanded respect. He was building a new cosmic order based on law, justice, and the authority of Olympus. And these Silver Age humans were basically spitting in his face. They were a failed experiment, an ungrateful creation that refused to acknowledge its creators. Now, this isn't the vigorous, timeless youth of the Golden Age. This is a state of prolonged, witless infancy. For 100 years they were basically giant toddlers, completely dependent and utterly clueless. Only after this ridiculously long childhood did they enter a very brief adulthood. And that adult life was, in Hesiod's words, full of sorrow because of their foolishness. They were not wise or noble. They were immature. They hurt each other. And they were incapable of living without bringing misery upon themselves. But their biggest, most fatal flaw was their attitude towards the gods. You can just imagine Zeus on his throne, watching these foolish creatures, fuming. So, he did what any self-respecting god-king would do when faced with such epic insolence. He wiped them out. He didn't wait for them to die off. Okay, so the Silver Age was a bust, a complete failure, 100-year-long childhood followed by a brief, foolish adulthood and topped off with a healthy dose of impiety that got them erased from existence. You'd think Zeus, sitting up on Olympus, might be getting a little frustrated with this whole creating humanity project. So what did he do next? He decided to try again. Father Zeus created the third generation of mortal men, the Bronze Race. And if the Silver Race was a downgrade in terms of piety and wisdom, the Bronze Race was a terrifying leap in a completely different direction. This time, the problem wasn't arrogance towards the gods. It was pure, unadulterated violence. Hesiod says this generation was terrible and strong, and he gives us a fascinating clue about their origin. They were fashioned from ash trees. That might sound random, but it's incredibly significant. In ancient Greece, the best, toughest, most resilient wood for making spears came from the ash tree. So these people were literally born from the material of weaponry. Their nature was predetermined by their very substance. They weren't made for farming or philosophy or art. They were made for war, and they were terrifyingly good at it. Their power was immense, their strength unapproachable. Their hearts were not made of flesh and feeling. They were made of adamantine unbreakable, mythical substance, harder than any metal. They were living weapons. Their entire existence revolved around one thing and one thing only: the grievous works of Ares, the god of war. They didn't care for peace. They didn't care for community. They didn't care for anything that didn't involve conflict and bloodshed. Their society reflected this obsession. They didn't eat bread, the product of cultivation and patience. That was for the softer races. They were meat-eaters, predators. Everything in their world was hard, metallic, and brutal. Their armor was bronze. Their weapons were bronze. Even their houses were forged from bronze. There was no iron in their age, only the burnished gleam of this one martial metal. Can you imagine it? A whole civilization built on this principle. Cities made of bronze, populated by warriors born from spearwood, with hearts of stone. There was no softness, no gentleness, no respite from the constant tension of their violent nature. So, what happens when you create a race of unstoppable super warriors who love nothing more than fighting? They fight, all the time. Against everyone, but mostly against each other. Zeus didn't need to flood the earth or strike them down with thunderbolts this time. The Bronze race was its own self-destruct mechanism. Their downfall was baked into their DNA. They were so consumed by their own rage, their own strength, their own lust for battle, that they completely destroyed themselves. They turned on one another and, in a wave of self-inflicted slaughter, wiped their entire generation from the face of the earth. And their end was as grim as their life. The Golden race became benevolent spirit. The Silver race became honored, if lesser spirits of the underworld. The Bronze race, they were seized by Black Death and went down, nameless and forgotten, to the dank, chill house of Hades. There was no honor in their end. No glory, just a dark, silent oblivion. They fought for nothing and earned nothing but an anonymous end in the gloom of the underworld, leaving no legacy but a warning about the self-consuming nature of unchecked violence. So, we've had the perfect Golden Age, he says, was more just and nobler. They were a godlike race of heromen, who are also called demigods. This is a crucial detail. These weren't just regular humans. Like the Bronze race, many of them were ultimately destroyed by evil war and dreadful battle. The fields of Troy and the gates of Thebes were soaked with their blood. It was a tragic end for so many, but for a select few, the most exceptional among them, Zeus granted a special honor. They didn't descend into the dank house of Hades. Instead, Zeus gave them a home apart from other men, a life in a remote paradise called the Isles of the Blessed. And who ruled over this heroic afterlife? None other than the Titan Cronus, freed from his prison in Tartarus to preside over this final haven. Here, in this echo of the Golden Age, these heroes live with hearts free from sorrow, enjoying an endless bounty from the earth. It was the ultimate reward, a recognition of their unique greatness. This age was a brief, brilliant flash of light in the growing darkness, a final surge of nobility before the long night to come. A demigod was the offspring of a god and a mortal woman, or sometimes a goddess and a mortal man. They were literally part divine, with the blood of Olympus flowing in their veins. This made them stronger, braver, and greater than ordinary people. This age is basically the Marvel Cinematic Universe of ancient Greece. This is when all the big-name heroes you've ever heard of had their moment. The impious Silver Age and the self-destructing Bronze Age. The pattern seems pretty clear, right? A steady, depressing decline into chaos and misery. Logically, the Fourth Age should be even worse. Some new rock bottom of human failure. But this is where the story takes a fascinating and unexpected turn. Hesiod, the poet telling this tale, breaks his own pattern. He knew the great epic stories of his culture, the tales of legendary warriors and their incredible deeds, and he had to find a place for them in his timeline. So, before plunging into the final, darkest age, he inserts a special fourth generation. This isn't another metallic age. This is the age of heroes. This generation, think about it, the legendary Trojan War, with the mighty Achilles, the noble Hector, and the cunning Odysseus. That happened during the Age of Heroes. The epic quest for the Golden Fleece, led by Jason and his crew of the A team that was basically the Avengers of its day. That was the Age of Heroes, the brutal war of the Seven against Thebes, a tragic story of a cursed family tearing itself apart. That was them, too. These were the figures whose stories formed the very bedrock of Greek culture, religion, and identity. They were larger than life, and their exploits were sung by poets for centuries. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, didn't the Bronze Age guys also do nothing but fight? And yes, they did. But there's a critical difference. The Bronze race fought out of a mindless, inherent bloodlust. Their violence was their nature, like a wolf's. The heroes, on the other hand, fought for something. They fought for Cleo's glory and immortal renown. They fought for honor and respect. Their wars weren't just random brawls. They were epic struggles with meaning, driven by passion, betrayal, love, and divine intervention. The gods were constantly meddling in their affairs, choosing sides, offering aid, and setting challenges. This was a time when the gap between the human and the divine was at its thinnest. Their fate was also unique. After the brief, shining intermission of the heroic age, the story of humanity's decline snaps back to its grim trajectory. We've had gold, silver, bronze, and the brief flash of demigod glory. And then, there's Zeus, the fifth and final generation, the Iron Age. And this is where the story gets deeply personal for the poet. He's not just relaying an old myth anymore. He's describing his own world, his own time, and he is filled with a profound and bitter despair. The man with the most power, the most brutal force, is the one who is praised. Hesiod describes two goddesses who have been living among humanity, trying to guide us. Their names are Idus and Nemesis. Idus is that sense of shame, reverence, and respect that stops you from doing something wrong. It's your conscience. Nemesis is that feeling of righteous indignation, that outrage you get when you see a terrible injustice go unpunished. It's the part of you that demands fairness. Hesiod says that, seeing the world in this state, these two goddesses finally give up. They wrap their beautiful forms in white robes, and they abandon the earth, flying back to Olympus to be with the other gods. Their departure is the final signal that humanity is a lost cause. With shame and indignation gone, there is no help against evil. We are left alone in our self-made hell, with nothing but bitter sorrows for company. The stage is now perfectly set. The world is broken, corrupt, and godless. Something has to give. Oaths are broken without a second thought, and liars are rewarded. The good, just, and honest person is seen as a fool, someone to be taken advantage of. Envy, with its shrill, hateful, and ugly voice, becomes the constant companion of humanity, delighting in the misfortune of others. People celebrate the wicked and scorn the virtuous. The entire moral compass of the world has been shattered and reversed. He delivers one of the most famous and heartbreaking lines in all of ancient poetry. Would that I were not among the men of the fifth generation, but either had died before or been born afterwards. Just think about that. He's saying he wishes he had been born in any other time but his own. It is a cry of pure anguish from a man looking at the society around him and seeing nothing but decay and misery. So what was so bad about the Iron Age? It was a culmination of all the previous failures, a world where every virtue had curdled into its opposite. The defining feature of this age is relentless, grinding, toil. Hesiod says, men never rest from labor and sorrow by day, and from perishing by night. The easy life of the Golden Age is a forgotten dream. The earth no longer gives its bounty freely. Life is a constant struggle, filled with anxiety and exhaustion. The gods, he says, give them grievous troubles. But the worst troubles aren't the ones from the gods, they're the ones we inflict on ourselves. The very fabric of society has unraveled. The most sacred bonds, the bedrock of any civilization, have shattered. Children dishonor their parents. Growing old is no longer a source of wisdom but a mark of weakness. The sacred bond of hospitality, xenia, is gone. Guests and hosts betray each other. Friends can no longer trust friends, and brothers turn against brothers as if they were strangers. The family, the core unit of human life, has become a source of strife, not comfort. And justice, the word has lost all meaning. The new law of the land is the law of the fist. Might makes right. This moral collapse reaches a tipping point in one of the most haunting images from the entire myth. So, Idus and Nemesis have packed their bags and left Earth. Humanity is alone, wallowing in its own filth, a world ruled by might, where children betray parents, and the very idea of justice is a joke. Upon Mount Olympus, Zeus is watching, and he is not pleased. This isn't just mild disappointment like he felt with the silver race. This is a cold, divine fury. The story of what happens next is told most famously by the Roman poet Ovid in his masterpiece, the Meta. He picks up where Hesiod leaves off, detailing the final straw that breaks Zeus's patience. Zeus has been hearing rumors of humanity's wickedness, but he decides he needs to see it for himself. So, he disguises himself as a mortal man and walks the earth, and what he sees appalls him. It's worse than he could have imagined. But the ultimate test comes when he visits the palace of an Arcadian king named Lycaon is infamous for his savagery and his contempt for the gods. When Zeus, still in disguise, arrives and reveals his divinity by giving signs, the common people begin to pray. But Lycaon just scoffs. He sneers, "We'll put him to the test and see if he's a god or a mortal." His test is monstrous. First, Lycaon plans to murder Zeus in his sleep, but he decides that's not dramatic enough. Instead, he takes a hostage a poor man who had come to his court seeking refuge, and he butchers him. He then cooks the man's limbs, partly boiling them, partly roasting them, and serves this horrific meal to Zeus. This one act is a violation of every sacred law. It's a betrayal of hospitality, an act of cannibalism, and the ultimate mockery of the divine. Zeus's reaction is instantaneous and terrifying. He unleashes his divine power, and a thunderbolt obliterates Lycaon's palace. The king himself flees in terror into the countryside, but he can't escape his punishment. As he runs, he begins to transform. His clothes turn into fur, his arms into legs. He grows a snout, and his lust for slaughter remains. He becomes the first werewolf, a creature doomed to forever reflect his own savage nature. But for Zeus, punishing one man isn't enough. Lycaon wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a worldwide disease. Zeus returns to Olympus and calls a council of the gods. You can imagine the scene. The gods gather in their celestial palace, and Zeus stands before them. He recounts Lycaon's depravity, but insists that the entire human race is just as corrupt. He declares they must all pay the penalty. His first instinct is to scour the earth with fire, to hurl his thunderbolts until nothing remains but ash. But the other gods cautioned him. They worry that such a cosmic inferno could destabilize the heavens themselves and threaten Olympus. So Zeus relents and chooses a different weapon. He decides on a punishment of biblical proportions. A great flood, a deluge that will drown the world and wash away the stain of the Iron Age. He will erase his failed creation entirely. The decree is made, the winds that hold back the rain are locked away, and the south wind, the bringer of storms, is unleashed. The god Poseidon is summoned and commanded to let loose the full power of the oceans. The rivers are ordered to break their banks. The fate of humanity is sealed. There will be no more chances, no more ages. This is the end of the line. The world is about to be unmade. So, Zeus has made his decision. The world is going to drown. Every man, woman, and child of the wicked Iron Age will be wiped from existence. The verdict is absolute, a total reset for a failed experiment. But not quite everyone. In the grand, tragic narrative of myth, there is almost always an exception. There's always a glimmer of hope, a single point of light in the overwhelming darkness. And in this story, that light came from two people. A man named Deucalion and his wife, Pyrrha. Who were they? Well, they had an impeccable lineage. Deucalion was the son of Prometheus, the titan who had famously defied Zeus by stealing fire for humanity. You remember Prometheus, he was a champion of mankind, a figure who genuinely cared for our well-being, even when it earned him eternal punishment. Pyrrha, his wife, was the daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora. Yes, that Pandora, the one with the infamous box, or jar, that unleashed all the evils into the world. So, Deucalion and Pyrrha were direct descendants of the Titan generation, the very family that had a hand in both the creation and the suffering of humanity. They were living links to a time before the complete corruption of the Iron Age, but it wasn't their family tree that saved them. It was their character. In a world that had abandoned all virtue, where Idaces and Nemesis had fled in despair, Ovid describes Deucalion as a man who loved justice, and Pyrrha as a woman filled with piety. In an age of liars, they were honest. In an age of violence, they were peaceful. In an age of impiety, they revered the gods. They were the last good people on earth. Prometheus, from his tortured perch on the Caucasus Mountains, knew what Zeus was planning. Even in his suffering, he was still watching over mankind. Seeing that his own son represented the last, best hope for the human race, he sent a warning to Deucalion. He told him about the coming flood and instructed him to build a chest, a small wooden ark, and provision it for a long journey. He built the vessel, and just as the first rains began to fall, he and Pyrrha sealed themselves inside. They were a stark contrast to the rest of humanity. As the floodwaters began to rise, the others were caught completely by surprise. They were too busy with their own wickedness, their betrayals and their greed, to notice the signs. They had scorned the gods for so long that the thought of divine retribution was laughable to them. So when the skies opened and the seas began to swell, there was only panic and confusion. They scrambled for high ground, climbing hills and mountains, but it was useless. The divine storm was relentless. Deucalion and Pyrrha, floating in their small wooden chests, were utterly alone. But they were safe. They weren't saved because they were strong or clever in a worldly sense. They didn't fight their way onto the ark. They were saved because of their moral goodness. Zeus, looking down from Olympus, saw the whole of humanity drowning in the flood he had created. But he also saw this one small vessel, carrying the last remnant of piety in the world, and he allowed it to survive. Their survival wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of divine clemency. It was an acknowledgement that even in the most corrupt of times, true goodness is worth preserving. They were the seed of a new beginning, floating on an ocean that was washing away the old, wicked world. The storm that Zeus unleashed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. This wasn't just a heavy rain. This was a cosmic deconstruction. Zeus didn't just let it rain. He commanded the south wind, Notus, to fly down to earth. Ovid gives this terrifying description of Notus, with his watery wings, pitch-black darkness, and a beard, heavy with rain. Water streams from his white hair and mist covers his forehead. As he soars over the earth, he squeezes the clouds, and the downpour begins. At the same time, Zeus's brother, Poseidon, the king of the sea, does his part. He strikes the earth with his trident, and the ground shudders, opening up new channels for the water. He summons the river gods, and commands them to break their banks and unleash their full fury. The distinction between land and sea vanishes. Ovid paints a surreal and horrifying picture of the world drowning. Where there were once fields of crops, there are now endless waves. Farmhouses, temples, and entire cities are submerged. The world becomes one vast, silent ocean. The last vestiges of humanity and the animal kingdom scramble for survival in a world that no longer has any solid ground. People climb to the highest hills, but the water keeps rising. Some get into boats and find themselves rowing over the submerged roofs of their own homes, or through the tops of what used to be forests. Fish swim among the branches of trees, and sea nymphs gaze in astonishment at the sunken cities below. The wolf swims alongside the sheep. The lion and the boar are carried away by the same wave. There is no more predator and prey, only the drowning. Birds fly until their wings give out and they fall into the endless water below. Deucalion and Pyrrha, sealed in their small wooden chest, are tossed about on this terrifying, world-covering ocean. For 9 days and 9 nights, they float, seeing nothing but water and sky, hearing nothing but the sound of the endless storm. They are the sole survivors of the human race, the last repository of our species, adrift in a world washed clean of life. They have no control, no destination. They are completely at the mercy of the gods who are destroying the world around them. Finally, Zeus looks down from Olympus and sees that his work is done. The wicked Iron Age has been purged. All that remains is the single ark, carrying the 2 pious survivors. His anger is spent. He gives the signal for the storm to end. The north wind is summoned to chase away the rain clouds, and the skies begin to clear. Poseidon commands the sea god Triton to blow his conch shell, a mighty blast that signals to all the waters of the world that they must retreat. The rivers flow back into their beds, the sea pulls back to its shores, and slowly, cautiously, the land begins to re-emerge. The ark, carrying Deucalion and Pyrrha, finally comes to rest on the summit of Mount Parnassus, one of the first peaks to break through the receding water. They push open the lid of their chest and look out upon a world of absolute silence and desolation. It's a primeval landscape of mud and slime, littered with the wreckage of their former world. They are completely and utterly alone. The relief of survival is immediately replaced by a profound sense of sorrow and loneliness. They are the last 2 humans in a dead world. The punishment is over, but their challenge has just begun. So the waters have receded, the storm is over, and Deucalion and Pyrrha stand alone on the summit of Mount Parnassus. They look out at a world that is silent, empty, and dripping with mud. Can you imagine the feeling? And then Pyrrha is horrified. It clicks, and as they go, the great cycle concludes. From the effortless perfection of the Golden Age to the moral collapse of the Iron, humanity's journey was one of decline, arrogance, and finally, cataclysm. The flood wasn't just a punishment, it was a total reset, washing away a failed world. But the story doesn't end in oblivion. It ends with a strange and stony rebirth, creating a new a people born from the bones of the earth, destined for struggle but defined by our end. It's a powerful, pessimistic, yet strangely hopeful myth that asks us a timeless question. Which age are we in now? They reach down, pick up stones, and toss them over their shoulders. They don't dare to look back. But behind them, a miracle is happening. The stones begin to lose their hardness and rigidity. They soften, swell, and slowly begin to take on the vague shape of human beings, like a sculptor's first rough-hewn work in a block of marble. The damp, earthy parts of the stones become flesh, the solid parts become bone, and the veins in the rock become blood vessels. And incredibly, the stones thrown by Deucalion become men, and the stones thrown by Pyrrha become women. A new human race is born, not from the gods, but from the very rock of the earth. And this explains everything about us. We are, as Ovid says, a hard race, experienced in labor, proof of the stony substance from which we were made. We weren't born into paradise this time. We were born into a world of toil, with the resilience of stone in our very bones. Their great mother isn't their biological mother, it's the earth itself, Gaia, the mother of all living things. And what are the bones of the earth? The stones. The oracle wasn't commanding sacrilege. It was a test of their wisdom. He explains this to a relieved Pyrrha, and though they are both still skeptical and awed by the strangeness of it all, they decide to obey, to dig up the grave of their mothers and scatter their bones. It's the highest form of sacrilege, a violation of the most sacred laws of both gods and men. She refuses, trembling, saying she would rather remain alone forever than commit such a terrible crime against her own parent. But Deucalion, the wise son of the clever Titan Prometheus, thinks hard about the cryptic words. A goddess of justice like Themis would never command such a wicked act. There had to be another meaning, the crushing weight of being the last two people alive. Ovid says, they wept, horrified by the silence and the desolation. They were saved, yes, but for what? To live out their final years as lonely custodians of a dead planet. They were old, and the task of repopulating the entire world seemed not just impossible, but absurd. So what do? They go to the one place you go when you need answers from the gods. And the oracle speaks, but it doesn't give them a clear instruction. It gives them a riddle, a strange and disturbing command. Depart from my temple, veil your heads, unfasten the belts of your robes, and cast behind you the bones of your great mother. They find their way to the ancient oracle of the goddess Themis, a primordial deity of divine law and order. The shrine is damaged, covered in moss and slime from the flood. Its altar fires cold, but it is still a sacred place. They prostrate themselves on the cold stone and pray for guidance. They beg the goddess to tell them how a dead world can be brought back to life. Thamis hears their prayer. Deucalion and Pyrrha are stunned into silence. And then they veil their heads, so as not to witness a divine mystery they are not meant to see. They walk away from the temple, and so